Okay, first of all, Anne Kwakkenbos, I want to thank you to take the opportunity to talk with me, let's say for about 30 minutes, hopefully. I'll try to stick with that. I've got my timekeeping watch. And to discuss the topic of gender equality in several aspects of it, because it is a very broad topic. First, I'd like to introduce you to readers who do not, or listeners, more to better talk about listeners who do not know you. Anne, you are, I know you for the past almost decade as a gender expert, and not just any gender expert. You are relentless in what you do, infatigable, they say in French. So it seems you never get tired, although I know that you sometimes get very tired of what you do, because it is tiring. A relentless and staunch advocate for gender equity, equality, women's empowerment, women's rights, not just for the sake of women's rights, but for the sake of furthering a better world, a more just, sustainable world. You work with a lot of women and men, from Kabul to Eastern DRC, from South Sudan to Northern Iraq, in New York, Brussels, The Hague, where not. Most of the places you work in, you visit, are not the kinds of places people like to go. They are hotspots of inequality. You work together with, of course, you work for Cordaid. You also work with Women Equals Men. You work with people from UN Women. You work with Caritas. And sometimes I really wonder whether your days do not have 24 hours, but 48. It is a privilege and also a pleasure to talk with you in the coming 30 minutes. There are two reasons we have this discussion now. It's the upcoming International Women's Day on the 10th of March. And,
8th of March.
Sorry, 10th of
the
March.
8th of March.
I said the 8th of March, 10th of March.
No, it is the 8th of March. You said the 10th.
All right. But the 10th of March is the start of CSW, right?
Yes. Well, yes.
Okay.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is also something you're going to.
Yeah.
It is the Commission on the Status of Women, which is an annual meeting. And probably it's the most important meeting where the international community dives into, well, as they say it, the status of women. What is the status of the equality of women? Are we making progress? Are we regressing? What are the challenges and how are we going to overcome them? So thanks again. That was a long introduction. I want to start by a quote from Chimamanda Ngozi Adiche, novelist, feminist. You know her. Some 10 years ago, in her TED Talk, she said, the way gender functions today is a grave injustice. And that is not something that I need to explain to you, but I'd like you to explain to listeners or viewers, what is the essence of this gender injustice?
Yeah. Okay. First and foremost, thank you, Frank, for that very, very elaborate and maybe too positive introduction. I will try to honor your your expectations. No, I mean, what she said, she's completely right. As soon as you are born, a part of your future is already determined by society. There's already expectations on you if you are either born with female genitalia or male genitalia. It starts right from the start. It already shows when someone goes and visits a baby. They will probably call a girl pretty, and a boy, they will give a different name. It already starts there. There are different expectations. and boys and girls, and that also is also what gender comes down to. It's not just about women, it's about men, women, boys and girls. You already have to adhere to these expectations, to these roles and values and norms that are created from the start, from the moment that you're born. And these expectations are put on you by society, by your family, by work, all these kind of things. And that's why gender is a limiting construct for a lot of people.
And this is something you notice across cultures, across times, across countries, across religions?
Absolutely. It's universal. Of course, per culture, there are different expectations, but in every place you're born, there is still different expectations, either if you're women or men. So it's a big difference, to put it like that. If you're born in Afghanistan or if you're born in the Netherlands, of course, there are different expectations, but there's still a different element of being born as a girl or as a boy, as a girl or as a boy, and how you're seen by society, how you're treated by society. And those expectations can be extremely limiting.
So it is something, if you work on this, if you want to redress this, if you want to address this, I would say changing that asks for a radical revolution, given the fact that it is all over across all layers of society, across all cultures.
Exactly. And we've already had a few of these revolutions in Western Europe and in the United States. And of course, there's trickle-down effect to the rest of the world. And also in other countries, in the African continent, you also see different revolutions coming up that women especially say, hey, this is not the way I want to live. This is not the way I see my life. And the thing is that all of the places we work and live in, including the Netherlands, is still patriarchal. So that means that most of the power and control is still with men. They are often not extremely willing to give up that power and to share that power, even though communities, societies, everything flourish if you share it, if you actually work together with women and men, if you make sure everyone benefits from it. But still, the idea that you have to give up power is very scary for a lot of people. And this is everywhere the case. It's also in the Netherlands. We still have a pay gap in the Netherlands. Women still earn significantly less for the same jobs compared to men. And this is even for women of color worse than for white women. Gender is in that sense not just about what are your genitalia. In gender comes everything together. Where you were born, if you're from a city or you're from a rural background, if you have if you're living with a disability, what kind of religion, your sexual orientation, all these elements together with your gender determine where you're going to end up in society in a lot of cases. And we need then revolution, absolutely. But it's a hard fight to fight.
So we're 5 minutes into the talk and we already used the big words, revolution. You mentioned the word power and also patriarchy. Maybe it was also Chimamanda Adiche, or maybe someone else, but she talks about this narrowed look, a narrowed down definition of masculinity as something that allows man to maybe she even defines masculinity as the desire to dominate at the expense of others. Well, domination is always at the expense of. I just try to maybe dive a little bit into this power aspect of the work and the power inequality and the power distribution. What is, when you talk about masculinity and femininity, maybe that has already you've passed beyond that, talking about this dichotomy of masculinity and femininity. I don't know, but what is the essence of this toxic kind of masculinity that is at the basis of patriarchy? What is it?
Yeah, so when we talk about masculinity, we also have to be very careful to not make all masculinity negative. There's also positive elements of masculinity, and the same for femininity. There's negative things and positive things, and it all comes together. And these are characters that we link to being female or being male. Well, that's not always the case. We all know how diverse people are and how diverse communities are. Where the danger is that if you would raise a boy in the way that they always have to be strong, that they are not able to show emotions, that the only way they can get things done is by using aggression, that is an example of negative masculinity, or as some people call it, toxic masculinity. Those are the elements we actually want to exclude. Because if you, for example, take South Sudan, where we've seen a lot of problems in communities with cattle raiding, where young men are simulated to go and steal cattle from other tribes, which is a very cultural element. And in essence, you can say how much is wrong with that. Where it gets wrong is that it often comes with a lot of violence and stealing of women, because they don't just steal cattle, they also steal women. Or they steal the cattle so they can actually marry a woman, because you can only marry if you have enough cattle. That all comes together and has to do with masculinity. So the more cattle you have, the more power you have, and you can get a wife out of that. The thing is that in a lot of cases, this, and I'm putting my fingers in the air, this toxic masculinity is actually stimulated by also women, not just men. Because women feel that they need to be bought, and that they are worth this amount of cattle, and that they are in this position that people should pay a lot of money for them. And that's actually toxic femininity, to put it like that. Who has the power, who has the decision power, and how get things done? And this is per culture very different, but what we see overall the world is that most of the time men are the ones that making decisions, especially outside of the households. You see a lot of differences inside of the household. But outside of the households, men are often considered the ones that make a decision. I think the example we saw last week in the White House is extremely interesting. Often being an emotional is being put on women. Like, we can't have a woman leader because she's too emotional. And when a woman shows emotions, it's seen as negative. Well, what we saw last week in the White House, where Zelensky and Trump and G.D. Vance were sitting there, these were three very emotional men. And there, it's not then used as negative. So you can see that different elements can be used in different things. And because men have the power, they can get away with different things than women can get away with. Does this make sense, Frank?
It makes sense, although I saw it as extremely negative, in the sense that this was some kind of unleashed, I wouldn't even call it emotionality, but there was a lot of emotions, but by men who are with access to some of the most dangerous kinds of buttons to push and strings to pull, and that made it a disgusting scene, actually. So I didn't really see it as positive, but yes, it was emotional, and this time it was men getting emotional.
Yeah.
Maybe
and it's not positive at all. It's more that no one will actually say, "Oh no, these men are so emotional. They shouldn't be making these decisions.
Exactly.
They shouldn't be in these power positions."
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I get your point. Yeah. Also, someone who said, "Yeah, the higher you get, the more you move up, in terms of career or position or prestige, if you're a woman, you see," which is still the case. Let's look at this. You've already started doing that. Look at the world of 2025 through a gender equity or equality lens. What do you make of not only what you've described, the scene of last week in the Oval Office, but the last couple of years? If you look at geopolitics and the rise of authoritarianism, the rise of conservatism, what do you make of that? What is your analysis of that? Does it frighten you? Does it have a huge impact on your work?
Yeah, I think if it doesn't frighten you, then you need to do a reality check on what's going on in the world, to be completely honest. We see a rise in...
Yeah.
Sorry, what did you say?
Yeah, exactly. What is going on? I mean, everybody has, from your perspective.
Yeah. So again, this is a bit of a reflection from what we see mostly in European countries and in, for example, United States. But we also see, again, the same effect in some African countries. Also, often influenced by conservative factors in the United States or Europe, who are paying countries to become more conservative. An example of this is the enormous backlash against LGBTQ plus rights in Uganda. This was all an agenda that actually is coming from the United States and Europe. But that's a little bit of a side note. What we see is that more and more people lean towards right-wing extremism, lean towards conservatism, and you can have a lot of different analysis about this. One of the things that I think, but I could be wrong, but what I think is that we have been making so much progress when it comes to gender equality and women's rights. Women are on the rise, they're flying, they're doing an amazing job. And that can be
the last 2 decades, or when you talk about this progress, this is the last ever since Beijing, or?
I think already before Beijing. I mean, we have at least in Europe and in the United States, we had the 2 feminist revolutions. The first one was about the right to vote, which was right after the First World War. Well, it started, of course, before the First World War. And then the second one, which was really about bodily autonomy and sexual health and sexual rights. So that we've had those things, and that has a trickle-down effect over the whole world. And now we are gaining, and with we, I mean feminists and women and men all over the world, we're gaining more and more power. We're discussing more and more issues. And there is a part of the population that feels uncomfortable with that. That feels that maybe the status quo as it was would be better if it remained that way. So what you always see in a revolution, you will have a counter response.
Yeah.
But
when you talk about the part of the population that is uncomfortable with this progress, are you talking about Europe, United States, or are you talking also about the countries in Africa or Asia or the Middle East that you visit?
Absolutely. So, for example, if we look at the Commission on the States of Women, where I'm going next week, we have a lot of amazing women's rights, civil society organizations, including Cordaid, that are promoting gender equality, that are working tirelessly to make sure that we support everyone, so women and men, in the same way. And we all know that it works, and that is better for the whole community if we do that. But you see that there's more and more conservative actors that are using that same platform to promote their more conservative agenda, which often goes back to the more traditional family values. I don't think necessarily there's something wrong with family values. Family values are part of the societies we live and work in. The question is, are you putting it on people, or are you letting people choose what they want to do with their lives? And what you see often with these more conservative actors is that they strongly believe that there are specific roles in society for women and for men. And in practice, that means that women have a lot less to say and have a often dedicated role in the household and not necessarily outside of the household. And that also has to do with bodily integrity. Who makes the decisions what a woman can or cannot do? And that's where we see a big debate taking place now. And for Cordaid, that's also really important. Like, we need to have women have the opportunity to decide if they want to use anti-conception or not. That's a decision you need to make as a couple, woman and men, and not just a man who controls that, or society who decides what a woman or a man cannot do. And that's the sort of thing we're in now. Personally, I feel this is a pushback because we've actually gained so much ground, and because of the COVID pandemic. We have seen another backlash on women's rights and gender equality. And that's also something we need to take into account.
There's many things. First, let's talk about the progress, not just the progress, that came with the right of women to vote, and with the second revolution, talk about health and sexuality, but the progress that was made by women's movements across the globe in the past 2 decades. I mean, let's say before Trump. Can you describe the progress that was made there? Let's say since Beijing.
Well, to be completely honest, we made a lot of progress since Beijing, but the last few years we're not making progress anymore.
I read back. Some say it was very slow, and some say they talk about a regression.
Yes, I think we can say that we are currently in a regression. we see that now with how, for example, the current Trump government looks at women's rights and gender equality. We see it with our own government that is cutting development aid, especially on gender equality and women's rights. We are seeing a regression. We see it in languages in UN Security Council resolutions, especially countries like Russia and China, and now also the US are blocking specific language on gender. Currently with the CSW.
Like what kind of language?
Well, what kind of language? So, for example, often in text, you talk about gender equality. And because a lot of these conservative actors feel that gender can potentially also promote LGBTQ+, they prefer to refer only to women. But what we saw now in Trump is that a lot of research, and I don't know the complete list, so we would have to check that, Frank, but there's a list of terms that can no longer be used in government-funded research. And one of the terms is actually woman. One of the terms that there will be no funding available for research on women. Well, we actually know, especially when it comes to medical research, most of the medical research over the last 100, 200 years has been done on men. So a lot of medical procedures, medication, all these kind of things are designed for men and not for women. So that's just an example. The women's body, we haven't done as much research on it as we have done it on the male body. All these kind of things, there is a fear, and personally as a feminist, I do not understand the fear, but there's a fear that feminism, that gender equality is a threat towards society, which in my humble opinion, it is not at all.
Maybe they also see it as a threat because, and then we come back to what we started talking about, true gender equality would mean a completely different kind of society. No?
Yes.
The end of the status quo.
Yes.
At least.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How do I say this? That the last couple of years, you see this rise of authoritarianism, anti-democrats. Let's say I would call them predatory capitalists. Combining forces and getting a hold at somehow the center stage of political power, whether that is in the United States, also in Europe. They're gaining influence, not just influence, they're gaining power. They're right at the center of power. The way you describe it is, okay, there's a debate going on and it makes our work more challenging and difficult. I would say we, and especially you in this, at the forefront of this struggle for gender equality, are getting into some kind of huge storm. It feels as if there is a clash of forces, the conservative, reactionary forces, and the liberal ones, who want to keep struggling and keep moving forward for equality and equity.
Yeah. Well, every change in society works with 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's something we have to sort of accept. And if I can just make it a little bit about me, I decided to work in gender in conflict. I knew that it wasn't going to be easy, but I also know that especially in times of conflict, you can actually make the biggest steps, because those are also the moments history is being made and people and women and men can take different roles because suddenly the status quo is changing. So there's also opportunity in the chaos in that sense. We are taking a step back, and I don't know if you've read the book, The Handmaid's Tale, or there's now also a television series. You haven't read it, Frank? I know you're a big reader. You need to read the book. It's I will make sure we'll arrange that for you. In The Handmaid's Tale, they also discuss how slowly society is changing. They are like literally frogs in a boiling pot of water. You don't realize what's happening. As feminists, we are the canaries in the mine. The canaries that notice that there's enough oxygen anymore, and then they drop dead. And that's what's happening now. The attacks on civil society, and especially on gender equality and women's rights, shows that there is a backlash on democracy, there's a backlash on civil society, there's a backlash on rights for everyone, and they pick us first. This is a standard operating procedure in your authoritarian regimes 101 approach. This is what's happening, but that also means that we aren't giving up. And if there's one thing that these people completely underestimate, is how strong these women are. The women we as Cordaid work with in South Sudan, in Congo, in Afghanistan,
Kabul.
You name it, they are there. Even if there's no funding, they are not giving up and they keep on going. And I think, and sorry, someone is trying to call me. I'm just trying, wait, let me, sorry. 1 second. Wait, sorry. So we're not giving up.
And that gives you strength to keep going and hope.
I have to. We're not giving up. We can't.
No, you're not giving up. And that reminds me, I was going to end with that actually, because I really was impressed by the quote. Is this young climate activist from, I think, from the United Arab Emirates, who was also on the Beijing 30+ meeting in New York in September last year, I think.
Yeah.
And she said, we can't give up. How did she say it? She said, hopelessness is for the privileged.
Yeah.
Getting hopeless is for the privileged.
Exactly. We can't give up. Like, we as Cordaid, we stand for equal societies for everyone. We want to include everyone. We want to make sure everyone benefits. We're not giving up. We're not stopping. It's going to be hard. And to be honest, sometimes I do want to crawl in a corner with a blanket, and that's okay. You need your self-care. You need to recharge. But if our colleagues can keep on going, then who are we in our lovely houses in the Netherlands with all the luxury we can have to give up? And I think that's something we need to keep on working on. And I think Cordaid also wants to keep on working on that. But it's going to be tough. And that's also why I'm very curious for the coming year, how it's all going to go and how it's all going to work out, how we as civil society are going to keep it together, how we're going to work together, how we're going to make sure that women's rights organizations from all over the world can keep on going and keep on doing what they do. And as Cordaid, we also have the responsibility to bring these type of organizations into every part of our work, not just in the gender projects, but everything we do. These are the organizations that are resilient, that are fierce, and that can make a change for the future.
So that is very powerful, and the way you describe it also, that these people you work with from Kabul to other parts of the globe, East and Western Africa, they are somehow also giving you, they serve as an example. So who are we to stop if they keep going? That's what you're saying, actually. Are there examples also in a different way that maybe countries, maybe societies that serve as an example of how things can also be done in terms of gender equality? Who is at the forefront? Who is still being very progressive and shows us the way to go?
So at the moment, 2 countries that I really look up to are Spain and Iceland. And Spain has decided that they really see as violence against women, gender-based violence, as a huge threat to society. So they've really decided to work on gender equality and women's rights and also ensure that there's less violence against women. They've also embraced feminist foreign policy, and they're really, really a thought leader on this. And I hope other European countries will look at them and follow the example. And then there is also Iceland. To be fair, Iceland is a relatively easy country to do this in. They have a small population, but and they even have a female prime minister. But still, even though there is so much equality in Iceland, still there are challenges. So last year, all the women they went on strike. All the women in Iceland went on strike, including the female prime minister. And they said, okay, we're not doing this anymore. This is not acceptable. I think that's the challenge we have for the coming years. How are we going to be united with for different civil society organizations all over the world? How are we going to be united and not divided? Because that's the tactic of the other side. That's the tactics of the more conservative right. And also, yeah, they are going to try and break us up. And that's what we need to work on, to make sure that we're not going to turn against each other, but that we're going to make sure we work together as civil society to improve the situation for women and men worldwide.
However big the headwind.
Exactly.
I want to zoom in maybe very briefly, because I'm afraid I'm not going to keep to these 30 minutes, but Afghanistan. Maybe we cannot discuss everything, and of course we cannot, but and it's also a very delicate topic. But what strikes me, and I've worked also with you and with Cordaid in the past 20 years, you know, I've been interviewing women in Afghanistan. Given the state the country's in now, I mean, especially the situation for women under Taliban rule, for me, one of the amazing things is that even there, and maybe I should say specifically there, it is still possible to promote, to further women's rights, however small the space you have. Is that something you can reflect on?
Yes, so this is not a Cordaid example. This is an example that I heard from someone else. But at a certain point, the de facto authorities, the Taliban, had decided that women were no longer allowed to go to the gym, which is, of course, very, very important for women, for their physical and mental health. But what a lot of women in Afghanistan then did is that they started to all start physical therapist places. So all these women were going to physical therapy. And this is a creative way how women go around the rules that are being put on. And we hope, or as they say in Afghanistan, inshallah, that they can keep on doing this. But there's constant little, in Dutch you say olifantenpaadjes, there's always little ways how to work around the rules, which is extremely exhausting and frustrating. And it's dangerous, because you're walking a very thin line. Like, you don't want to break the rules, you can't break the rules. And as Cordaid, we have the responsibility for a lot of stuff. We can't do that. We have to stick within the rules that are there, and we have to respect them. But I see a lot of women who are trying to figure out ways to still be able to do the things they could do before the takeover, but then with a different name or in a different way, or more hidden. When the Taliban had control the last time in the 90s, there were so many girls and women who still went to school, but they were illegal and, you know, hidden schools. Women are creative and resilient, and let's see what's going to happen in Afghanistan for the coming years. But they are not giving up, so we shouldn't give up.
The last couple of weeks, I talked to a woman aid worker in Kabul, and she said one of the ways we can keep going is knowing, not only hoping, but knowing that this will pass, and that this nightmare will end. We've been through a lot in the last, let's say, 100 years, and we know it will end, and that gives us some kind of strength. Okay, CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women.
Yes.
Which is the biggest intergovernmental body probably promoting the equality of women. You're going to their annual meeting next week.
Yeah.
And this year's edition, the 69th, I think, is specifically reflecting on the 30 years that have passed since Beijing. Beijing Declaration, one of the most progressive, important declarations of the international community when it comes to promoting women's rights and gender equality. Wow, that was a long sentence.
It was a very long sentence.
What are you going to do there?
Well, good question. So the fact that it's so big, it's also an opportunity to meet women's rights activists and advocates from all over the world, which is also a really especially in these times, really important. People like me, who are the gender experts in organizations, we're usually quite lonely. We're usually alone in the organization, so it helps to be connected with other activists and work on that. There is dozens and hundreds of side events, things we can learn on, reflect on all of the countries in the world. There are thousands and thousands of women there. It's truly, first and foremost, a network and learning opportunity. At the same time, there is the negotiations that are taking place by literally the Commission on the Status of Women. And member states are part of this commission, and they negotiate together on the text where they say, okay, this is the current status. Normally, every year there's a specific topic that they're discussing. This year, they're really reflecting on Beijing 30+. So the Netherlands is a very inclusive country in that sense. They have a civil society representative in the delegation, and they regularly update civil society, go, this is what's happening, and these are the topics we're discussing, and this is the language we're pushing. But as you can understand, there are more progressive countries and there are more conservative countries. So you see a lot of dynamics going on there. Like, which language do you use? And this is a lot of nitty-gritty word debates. So that's one of the...
When you say there are more progressive and there are more conservative countries, what are the most progressive ones and what are the most conservative ones?
Well, up to a few months ago, the Netherlands was one of the most progressive ones.
And now?
Not anymore. No, this government has a different view on how we look at gender equality and women's rights. And
so that means, that's very interesting. That means that in a couple of months' time, you actually literally see in the way people talk, the Dutch representatives, in the way they behave, in the way they talk, not only in their policies, obviously, you see the shift, you see the change.
Yeah, that's how quick it can go. And
can you give one or two examples? Because that's very interesting.
So, for example, in the past, the Netherlands... I'm not sure, because we are still figuring out how this is going to work. But let's use an example from the United States. The United States, if like last year, would have still used language like gender. The negotiator for the US will probably now not use the word gender anymore, but focus on women.
Okay. You know, this is 1984. So some words are being banned.
Words are being banned, and you have to deal with more conservative countries, especially some of the African countries are more conservative. You see, especially the Nordic countries are more progressive, and they all have to work together to come to this agreed language. And then there is also debate, like there is language that has been set from previous years, so you can't go back on it. But you can also can't make any progress. So right now, the part of negotiations is really keeping the status quo.
You're also going there as a Cordaid representative. I mean, for you, it is an important event, you know, to connect and to also refresh, because that's where you meet the others. But it is also a platform where you can promote Cordaid's policy, which is also a policy that was very much created and developed by yourself, based on all the experiences and the work you do. I know there are many, but could you give me the two most important, I like to say, action points, because policies is more than about words, about actions. What are you going to do? What are we going to do? What are the most important action points of this policy?
Well, in our compass, as Cordaid, we have said that by 2030, we want all our projects to be gender transformative, which means that in all our projects, we're going to take into account the role and the norms and the values that are present and how we can improve the roles for women and men both. That's our goal. So our policy gives us guidance on how we are going to work in the coming years. So the policy is for until the end of 2026, if I say that now by heart. What is gender for Cordaid? What does it mean? How can we do these things? And the ambition is also we're going to develop per country office gender action plans. So that also helps with the policy, because a policy is just a policy. You need to implement the policy. But this is how we look at gender. This is how we want to implement gender, and that's what this policy is for. And unfortunately, we live in a world where if it's not in a policy, it doesn't exist.
Okay, but you've got this policy, and you know what you want to do. I mean, not just
Yeah,
you, but we as
all of
Cordaid know
us.
what.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. At the same time, this we talked about headwind, this fierce and increasingly strong conservatism, which is sweeping over the globe, is making it more and more difficult. Not only just in the US and in Europe, but also in conservative countries, whether it be in the Middle East, in Africa, in other places that feel they're doing the right thing because the other big leaders in the world are doing the same thing. So that makes it more and more difficult to implement this policy.
yeah. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. And I think it actually, for me, means that we need to work even harder.
Mm,
If you get, if you get that headwind as you're talking about, that means that we have to cycle faster,
mm,
to use a very
mm,
Dutch
mm,
comparison. Like
mm,
if we get confronted on what we know and understand is important and is the right of everyone and is also successful for implementation, then we need to stand even fiercer for this topic. The fact that the Dutch government has decided to cut budget on gender and women's rights means for me that Cordaid should invest even more in it.
mm, mm, mm,
Because it means that we've actually been making progress. It means that those who are afraid of women's rights and gender equality are pushing back more. So this is the momentum.
This is the momentum, but it also means that you have to seek different kinds of funding sources.
Yes,
Are there opportunities?
of course, there's always opportunities,
Mm-hmm,
but we
mm-hmm.
have to work hard. And don't forget, we have a strong donor, a lot of
Yes.
private donors who also stand for gender equality and women's rights. They find that
Mm-hmm,
topic also extremely important. So that's
mm-hmm,
one thing. There are still donors out there who feel this topic is important. We work closely with UN Women. A lot of the Nordic countries will still put an emphasis on that. The Netherlands still has a feminist foreign policy. Germany
mm-hmm,
has a feminist foreign policy. There's still a lot that can be done. The
mm-hmm,
fact that things are cut means actually we need to invest in it ourselves more.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Maybe a few minutes back, you said, I don't understand why they're afraid. Remember when you said that?
Yeah,
You talked about fear, because it reminded me again of this young climate activist from the Arab Emirates. She said in these days, and I think she talked about the regional context, with a crackdown on civil society, with anti-democratic rule. It is an extremely, that's what she said, is an extremely fearful time to be a young feminist.
yeah,
At the same time, she said it does not mean that I'm not hopeful, or that I've given up hope. I will never give up hope. But yes, there is a lot of fear being a young feminist.
yeah. No, it's scary. And I'm not that young anymore. I still hope I'm young, but I'm not that young anymore. It's
Mm,
scary. It's scary, but we knew this was coming. We knew. We knew that people were gonna, you just mentioned 1984, books from The Handmaid's Tale, all the warnings every feminist all over the world has been giving for the last few years. If you are working on the topic of gender equality and feminism, you're not surprised this is happening.
mm, mm. Okay, you're not surprised, and well, it also looks as if you're doubling up, or you're doubling your efforts. Not only you, I mean the whole movement globally,
Yeah.
and that gives me also some kind of well, it's inspirational to hear that. Sometimes, I get so sick and tired of what's going on that you lose a bit of hope or energy. Um, Anna, we've talked for more than 30 minutes. I'm sorry for that.
No worries.
I really want to wish you well on not only on your trip to CSW in New York, but especially after that. You're going to continue your work in all the places you've mentioned. And through you, I think I also salute all the other women and men, fighting for the same cause. Thanks a lot for this half hour.
Yeah, thank you so much, Frank, and I'm really glad you want to give attention to this. And let's hope this is a temporary setback.
I hope that with you. I'm sure it is. Okay. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.